The Great Chinese Famine, 1959–1961. The Great Chinese Famine, which ravaged China from 1959 to 1961, stands as one of the most catastrophic events in human history. Between 15 to 45 million lives were lost, an unimaginable scale of tragedy driven predominantly by flawed government policies, political dogma, and environmental challenges. While it is a deeply sensitive topic within China, the famine has immense historical value as a case study in governance, ideology, and human resilience. It provides invaluable lessons for historians and policymakers alike, emphasizing the devastating consequences of totalitarian control and unchecked policy implementation. Following the formation of the People's Republic of China in 1949, Mao Zedong sought to reshape the nation into a formidable socialist superpower. His goal was ambitious: to elevate China to equal footing with global powers like the United States and the Soviet Union. However, this transformation was marked by rapid industrialization and collectivization, prioritizing political ideology over practicality or human welfare. The Great Leap Forward was the centerpiece of Mao's plan to revolutionize the country's economy and society. It pushed for agricultural collectivization into people's communes and aimed to industrialize rural China with initiatives such as backyard steel furnaces. This campaign, despite its grand aspirations, sowed the seeds of a disaster that historians would later recognize as one of history's most tragic man-made catastrophes. Under the collectivization model, private farming was eliminated, and peasants were forced to join state-supervised communes. The shift not only disrupted traditional agricultural practices, but also removed personal incentives for productivity. Centralized farming systems proved inefficient, and decisions were often made without practical understanding of local needs or conditions. Local officials, pressured to meet unrealistic quotas, falsified grain production statistics to avoid political retribution. These exaggerated reports led the central government to requisition excessive amounts of grain for urban centers and export, leaving rural areas severely undersupplied. The ideological commitment to achieving national success blinded leaders to the local crises unfolding under their rule. Misguided policies like the Four Pests campaign disrupted agricultural ecosystems. By targeting sparrows, pests vital to crop balance, such campaigns inadvertently caused insect overpopulation, decimating harvests. Additionally, the diversion of manpower and resources to backyard steel production, a hallmark of the Great Leap Forward, further crippled the agricultural sector. Extreme weather conditions, such as droughts and floods, further exacerbated crop failures. Yet, while these natural events worsen the crisis, they do not account for the famine's unparalleled scale. Without the flawed policies and political mismanagement, the effects of adverse weather could have been mitigated. Fear permeated Mao's authoritarian regime, silencing dissent and fostering an environment where officials dared not challenge flawed policies. The anti-rightist campaign, launched in 1957, purged critics and intellectuals, leaving a bureaucratic system rife with complacency. Policies were implemented without question, even when evidence of their failure became apparent. By 1959, the effects of mismanagement began to surface as food shortages spread across rural China. Grain allocations were diverted to urban population centers or exported to sustain national prestige, further isolating vulnerable rural communities. By the crisis's peak, entire provinces were suffering from acute hunger. With no food to sustain them, people resorted to extreme measures. Grass, tree bark, and even soil became substitutes for meals. Accounts of cannibalism, parents consuming their deceased children out of desperation, underscore the unimaginable despair many endured. Families were forced to sell children or abandon loved ones to survive. The famine decimated entire villages, affecting society's most vulnerable groups: women, children, and the elderly. Starvation was only one cause of death. Malnutrition-induced illnesses like dysentery and typhoid also ran rampant, ravaging already weakened populations. In some areas, mortality rates reached as high as 50%. Faced with mounting crises, the government chose denial. Propaganda minimized or misrepresented the famine, labeling it as nothing more than temporary natural disasters. Domestically, information was carefully controlled, and internationally, the full scale of the disaster was concealed. This censorship delayed interventions that could have mitigated the tragedy. By 1961, moderate leaders within the Communist Party, including Liu Shaoqi and Deng Xiaoping, began reversing some of Mao's policies. Communes were scaled down, and elements of private farming were cautiously reintroduced. Importing food from abroad became a key strategy to address shortages. These changes, though limited, marked the beginning of recovery. Though Mao faced criticism within the party for the famine's outcomes, his political stature allowed him to downplay his responsibility and blame external factors. These internal tensions laid the groundwork for subsequent events, including Mao's reassertion of authority during the Cultural Revolution. Survivor accounts paint an enduring picture of trauma as individuals and communities faced losses on an unimaginable scale. Families were torn apart and children were left orphaned. The rural fabric of Chinese society was irreparably damaged, with generations scarred by the famine's memories. Reforms introduced in the 1960s slowly restored stability in agriculture, and food production recovered to more sustainable levels. Yet, the psychological and demographic impact lingered, resisting attempts to fully rebuild a devastated society. This period of recovery also influenced China's resistance to future collectivization campaigns. Even today, open discussion of the Great Chinese Famine is limited within China. Official records defer to the narrative of the 3 years of natural disasters, sidelining the role of political mismanagement. This silence has made it difficult for historians to document the full scope of the tragedy, though emerging scholarship continues to shed light on its causes and impacts. The famine highlights the dangers of centralized policymaking in authoritarian regimes, where data is manipulated and dissent is stifled. From the inflated crop yields to the suppression of intellectual criticism, the disaster reflects the need for mechanisms of accountability and transparency in governance. Economic reforms under Deng Xiaoping in the late 20th century directly stem from the lessons of the Great Leap Forward and the famine. Deng's pragmatic leadership prioritized results over revolutionary ideals, signaling a fundamental shift in governance that would guide China's modernization in later decades. On an international scale, the famine is a sobering case study in the intersection of political systems and human rights. It calls attention to the global cost of placing ideology above well-being, serving as a reminder for future interventions in similar crises. The Great Chinese Famine, 1959-1961, represents one of history's most sobering lessons. It was not simply the result of natural forces, but a man-made disaster born of governance failures, political overreach, and misplaced ideological fervor. The catastrophe serves as a stark reminder of the potential human cost of unchecked authoritarianism and ill-conceived policies. For historians and scholars, understanding the famine is not only a pathway to preserving memory, but also a critical study in preventing future tragedies of a similar magnitude. While much of the famine's truth remains buried beneath censorship and historical revisionism, its legacy persists. The famine's consequences, both immediate and long-term, underscore the resilience of the human spirit in the face of immeasurable suffering and serve as a testament to the vital importance of responsible leadership in safeguarding lives and livelihoods. For historians and educators, the story of the Great Chinese Famine remains essential in ensuring that its lessons continue to resonate across generations.